The following video will show you some tips about how to prepare music scores for rehearsal and performance. The ultimate goal of score study is to gain the best understanding of the music so that we can know the score, committing as much to memory as possible. Knowledge of the score allows us to best communicate the composer's intentions and structure efficient and effective rehearsals. The presentation will involve 4 approaches. They are called the language of the conductor, score marking, flowchart, and phrase structure. These are study tactics that work well for nearly every type of music score. The language of the composer. The very first step is to number all of your measures. Sometimes a score is already printed with measure numbers, but if not, write them in yourself. Although these examples on the screen show measure numbers at the bottom, I now mark my measure numbers in the middle of the score because we will use the bottom space for something else. It is important to number the measures, especially if you are presented with a score like this one. At first glance, it looks like we have 2 pages with 9 measures total, but it is easy to overlook this marking, which means on the second page, there are 2 systems of staves, and they don't include full ensemble instrumentation. I will typically mark a straight line across the page where this occurs. In addition, I put a straight line across the top of every system to give a clean area to make note of harmonic analysis. It's best to use a ruler for this. A clear see-through ruler is great. We want to take care of our scores to make every marking as neat and clean as possible. Once the straight horizontal lines and measure numbers are marked, we can proceed with the language of the composer task. What we want to do is take account of every single marking this particular composer uses to communicate his or her musical thoughts. On a blank piece of paper, you're going to write down everything you see. Write down key signatures, time signatures, articulation markings, dynamics, both the words and symbol markings, tempos, fermatas, and especially all the words that appear in the score. You are basically writing down everything you see except for the notes themselves. Here is an example. Notice I have put a vertical line between each marking. At this point, it does not matter in what order you put the markings. You do not need to duplicate a marking after you have written it down once. This first example shows all the markings that Frank Kelly uses in his Cajun folk songs piece. This one shows all the markings used in Gustav Holst's First Suite in E-flat. This one is the Country Band March by Charles Ives, and this one is the Gumsuckers March by Percy Grainger. I call this the language of the composer because it is the totality of information we are given on the score itself. The next step in this approach is to reorganize and cross out the content on our paper. Group the time signatures together, then the key signatures. I only mark the concert pitch key signatures. Dynamics from softest to loudest, and the expression markings. Then make a list of all the words in a column on the left-hand side. Also, make note of tempos, the specific percussion instrument needs, and other instrumentation. As you place an item in the reorganized section, cross it out from your initial listing above. Cajun folk songs now looks like this. Holst First Suite results in this. Now, by looking at this one piece of paper, I can tell you with confidence that the only articulation markings in the entirety of the Frank Kelly's Cajun folk songs are staccatos and accents. There are no legato markings. There are no marcato markings or anything else. In Holst First Suite, the loudest dynamic that appears is quadruple forte. In the Kelly piece, the loudest dynamic is triple forte. Interestingly, Kelly never writes the specific dynamic marking of piano in this piece. Of great importance is the words column. You now have accounted for every word written in the piece. If you do not know the meaning of a word, look it up and write down the definition. You will now have confidence in rehearsal that a musician will never ask you the meaning of a term that you do not know. The language of the composer step is a great first overview to the score, and it can be done with any piece of written music. Here's a less traditional score by Joseph Schwantner called From a Dark Millennium. This complicated and involved score simplifies down to this one page in terms of markings. We see some different looking time signature notation. There are no key signatures. There are a good deal of dynamic content, several types of articulation markings, fermatas are included. There's a large percussion setup, an orchestral style winds instrumentation, and 2 columns of words that we want to make sure we know and understand. Now let's talk about marking the score. For a long time, I subscribed to the thought of using little or no color on my scores, thinking it was a crutch and detracted from really learning the score. However, more recently, Virginia Allen, professor at Curtis and the Juilliard School, shared her approach, and now I currently do use color in my score marking, being careful to be limited and using it in the right way. For softer dynamics, I use blue. For medium, green, and louder dynamics, red. Notice, if there are 3 Ps, I will put 3 small lines underneath. 2 Ps, 2 small lines, 1 P, one line, etc. For mezzo piano, I tail the end of the line down, and mezzo forte tail the end of the line up. For crescendo or decrescendo markings, I will put a small squiggle line showing where the dynamics are going. These dynamic markings are not telling me physically what to do. I do not see blue and instantly show a decrescendo with my left hand. Rather, these markings are really an aid in learning the sound of the score away from the podium. The colors often help see the intended balance of the ensemble more easily rather than engaging in an entirely black and white piece of paper. Just be sure to be subtle in the markings and don't highlight entire staves in colors. Since muted and pizzicato are very different sounds than open and arco, I mark muted or stop sounds with purple and pizzicato with pink. Look at this example. We have 2 horn staves above and 2 trumpet staves below. They are playing 2 very quick notes that are then held and crescendoed. A major second is happening in the second and third trumpets, so we will have some dissonant sound, and there are staccato and marcato articulations. Even if you can't hear the precise pitches, imagine what the sound would be like of the combination of trumpet sections and horn sections. Now, notice the plus sign above the horns. That indicates a stopped horn sound, a method of muting the horn with the player's hand. It gives a very different sound than the open horn. Now imagine the same combination, but with open trumpets and stopped horn. Good. Marking the stopped horn in purple helps us better imagine the sound prior to getting in front of the ensemble. Notice how I made just a small purple curved line at the start of the staff. This is a particularly helpful marking if the instrument continues to be muted on the next page, as most scores do not restate the muted instruction, and the notes on the next page that are muted or pizzicato will look the same as all the other black and white notes. I use orange as the color that cancels out any alterations and indicates the default sound of the instrument. I also mark entrances, which turn into potential cue points. I mark these in red with a small circle and a curved line. Look at this example. The notes in the triplet are tempo blocks. The notes marked after the entrance indicator are glockenspiel, also known as orchestral bells. These are 2 very different sounds, and it could be easy to overlook if not marked. The tools I use for this are colored gel pens. I find these are better than colored pencils because they maintain a nice, clean, and thin line. If you need to make a correction, use a small amount of whiteout to do so. Remember, don't fall in the trap of marking the score in a way to tell you what to physically do. It is my opinion that it is best to mark the score in a way that aids you to help create a mental, aural picture of the music. Now let's talk about making a flowchart. Nearly every college conducting course will have you make a flowchart of a piece of music as part of a major project. The Frank Battisti and Robert Garofalo text, A Guide to Score Study, is a great resource in this regard. These are the section categories we are going to account for in our flowchart. My sections are labels of A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, where we define what is a section in the piece. Measure numbers are the specific measure numbers of the sections. Form is not actual theoretical form like rondo, sonata, binary, ternary, but rather titles that we assign to each section that will help us remember them. They can be original titles, or better yet, are influenced by what the composer thinks or feels about those sections. Melodic interest is what instrument or instruments have the melody. You might even put a short notated graphic of the melody in the flowchart. Orchestration means what instruments are playing. Is it the flutes and strings? Is it brass? Is it full ensemble? Texture refers to the number of layers. Is it monophonic, polyphonic, homophonic, etc.? Harmony is the general key area, or more specific chords if applicable. A prerequisite to score study is to fully understand how transposing instrument notation works in chord structure. If you are not familiar with this, you will need to do some study of instrument transpositions and music theory. The categories of fastest and most are recommended by Gustav Meyer. Fastest means the instruments which have the fastest moving notes in that particular section. Most means which line has the most number of people in the ensemble playing it. Sometimes this is obvious, but there might be an instance where there are 2 lines of the score with a melody, and if those 2 lines are the clarinets and the first and second violins, that could be 25 people. Gustav Meyer says that in rehearsal, that working with musicians that have the fastest notes or the most number of people on a particular line will often help fix the ensemble issues most efficiently. So it is good to make note of that in our flowchart. Notes are simple messages to ourselves. Difficulty priority is a scale of difficulty from 1 to 10, 10 being the most difficult. This can refer to the difficulty of the music parts. There may be a difficult conducting passage. When this is marked, it gives you a priority schedule for what you should practice yourself and to rehearse with the ensemble to make best use of time. Substitutions is a section for if you do not have full instrumentation in your ensemble. If you have no bassoons and there's a line not covered by any other instruments, use this section to mark which instrument should cover it, and you will need to create a part. Warm-up ideas is a section where you can make proactive exercises for ensembles if you are in a teaching environment where the group does a warm-up. If there's a very difficult section, you can often devise a warm-up that incorporates the difficulty so your musicians will be better prepared when they arrive at it in rehearsal. Finally, phrase structure is something we can mark in the flowchart, but we will talk about it in detail in the next section. Here is an example of the first page of a flowchart for the Schwantner piece that was showed earlier. I used Microsoft Excel to construct this flowchart. The first column is marked Section A. It's measures 1 through 10. It has no key signature. The form title is Mysterious Intro. The time signature is 4/8. The tempo is 8th note equals 56. And the other categories are filled in accordingly. Flowcharts can end up being several pages and are a good way to account for all elements of the score in detail. The final part of this presentation will address the idea of composition phrase structure. This method was first shown to me by professors at the University of Michigan, the College Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati, and the Peabody Institute. I find it to be very useful and an excellent approach to memorizing the score. The idea behind it is that the human brain easily identifies small groups. Looking at this, you can instantly recognize the names of the shapes without any thought. You can also instantly see that there are groups of 2, 3, and 4. You did not have to concentrate and count 1, 2, 3 to know that there are 3 triangles on the screen. Our brains take note of this in other areas as well. If I snap a pulse and I say, notice every 2 beats, now notice every 3. Now notice every 4. You are able to do that without much thought, and you are accurate. You probably can focus on something else and still keep track of that pretty easily. But if I say notice every 13 beats that go by, it becomes more difficult. You can do it, but now your brain is engaged in a different kind of activity. You are actually concentrating on counting the number, and more of your focus must go there. You would have very little chance of consistently being correct without devoting energy to counting. When we see groups that are larger than 4, it is difficult to instantly identify their number. However, if we break these up into smaller units of 2, 3, and 4, we can instantly tell the larger number. 4 and 4 are 8, 2 and 3 are 5, 3 and 2 are 5, 3 and 3 are 6, and 4 and 3 are 7. So now, what we do is we look at the score and decide the phrase structure of the piece. This is likely going to correspond to the section labels of our flowchart. Try to group them into 2, 3, or 4 measures. Avoid marking phrases of 1 measure if possible. This example shows 2 phrases. Each are 4 measures long. I mark this at the bottom of the score in this way. Once the entire score is marked, you can usually get the entire phrase structure onto 1 sheet of paper. If you have a phrase that really is longer than 4 measures, mark it, but also break it up into subgroups of 2, 3, or 4. Here you can see the first phrase is 10 measures long. It is divided up into 2 times 3 plus 2 times 2. That means there are 2 measures repeated 3 times, then 2 more measures repeated 2 times. There is a difference between 2 plus 2 and 2 times 2. 2 plus 2 means 2 measures, then 2 somewhat different measures. 2 times 2 means 2 measures essentially repeated. Let's use the first 3 sections of Schwantner's piece to see how this method is helpful to memorizing the score. For this demonstration, we will use a recording as a tool, but you do not need a recording when you are studying the score on its own. Here are the opening measures. We will be conducting the 8th notes in a 4 pattern. Notice that there is an accent on 1, and every other measure there is an accent on the and of 1. Here's how to follow it. Go ahead and conduct along. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first 3 sections are as follows: 10 measures, then 6 measures, then 4 measures. The 10 measure section is 2 times 3 plus 2 times 2. I have labeled it the mysterious intro. The 6 measure section is 2 times 3. labeled Mysterious with Growing Tension. The 4-measure section is labeled Power and Shock. Conduct a 4 pattern throughout and notice the measure groupings as they go by. Here's the first 2 measures. 3. Measure 2. Now it repeats. 1. Third grouping of 2. 1. Okay, now 2 times 2. Here's 2 measures. Final 2 measures. Here we go. Here's a group of 6. 2 times 3. Growing tension. Second grouping. Third grouping of 2. Power and shock coming up, 4 measures. 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. And now we're in the next section. Now, answer the following questions out loud. How many measures are in the first section? What is the subgrouping? What is the title of this section? How many measures are in the second section? What is the subgrouping? What is the title of this section? How many measures are in the third section? What is the title of this section? Now conduct the pattern again with the recording, but don't look at the screen. Try to keep the structure in your head. After this, we'll conduct it again, and you will do it without the recording, and we will sing the piece. So here we go. This final time, conduct the 4 pattern and sing the piece. You won't be able to sing every line, but sing what you remember, and see if you're able to get through all 20 measures correctly. Thanks for watching, and good luck learning your scores. Feel free to email me or write comments with feedback or questions.